welcome to The Nation. I'm Melissa Ong. Today we are looking at why human rights education matters now more than ever, especially at a time when public understanding shapes how societies respond to conflict, inequality and global change. Now joining us is Dr. HOOI, Associate Professor at the University of Malaya, and she is also the head of the Research Group on Human Rights. Welcome, Dr. Khoo. Great to have you again.
Thank you.
And we talk about human rights as today is we celebrate Human Rights Day 2025. I'd like to start with this. You know, in Malaysia, human rights are usually seen as personal grievances where people organize demonstrations or protests or take it to the streets and speak out for something that they are not satisfied with. Now, from your research, how do Malaysians generally understand human rights, and why has the definition become so narrow and personalized as well?
Well, I guess in the context of Malaysia, human rights are being interpreted in many different lenses. And I guess one of the things is that people see human rights from the Western conceptions, that thinking that it's a Western construct. And the second one, of course, people was trying to argue whether human rights is compatible with the religion. So I guess that is basically the mixtures of how the rights are being interpreted in Malaysia. But at the same time, I think it is also defined by, some people say, ini hak saya. But when they say ini hak saya, sometimes they also tend to, in order to earn certain rights, they take away certain communities' rights. So there was a very narrow kind of conceptions about and the notions of human rights in the Malaysian context, whereby I think the notions of human rights are actually broader than that.
Now, in Malaysia, we don't usually operate on the left or right political spectrum. People form their opinions through identity, stability, culture, and so on and so forth. Without clear ideology, traditions, how do you Malaysians should develop their views on rights, and how does this shape public reactions to rights issues?
Well, it is true that in the context of Malaysia, we hardly say who is on the left side or the right side. Rather, we kind of divide our political parties based on sometimes communalism, politics based on the race and religions. Hence, I think with that kind of lens, if we look at the Malaysian context, actually we have moral education. We have civic education. We used to have civic education. And then now they were talking about, wanted to teach more about the values and things. But at the same time, we also have religious education. So all of these kind of different types of educations actually has some similarities that is related to rights. But just that in the context of Malaysia, we do not put that in the same framework. Hence, that kind of dilutes the whole interpretation of rights itself, and people misunderstand what is the meaning of rights really. Because if we go for the principles of human rights itself, looking at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which Malaysia is subscribed to, because as the UN member states, is as simple as everybody shared the equal rights despite of your race, religion, gender, sex, and many others. And what's really important is the dignity of each person, and we should not discriminate another community or another individuals, and also the rights should be actually respected.
Now, before I came on the show, I did some research and I just saw which are the countries that are, they so-called champion human rights, and Norway seems to be the top, where they are also, they consistently speak strongly in the UN and also global human rights program. In the Malaysian context, countries with strong literacy rights, or do they show higher trust and also maturity with better governance? This is just a broader perspective. What does a rights literate society actually should look like, and what would Malaysian gain if we move towards that direction and perspective?
Yeah, well, of course, when we put the governance language also into rights, it becomes more complicated, because there are countries that are not that democratic, yet they have good governance. So it is a mixture of, and while you also put in the lens of development within that kind of arguments. So when we look at the context of Malaysia's, of course, while the rights are not somehow, it is available, and as we can see in the federal constitutions, but it has not been really being argued or debated in a more in-depth way. But of course, in the context of Malaysia, we also have Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, and also Malaysia has been the UN Human Rights Council elected for several times, with the last one ended in 2024. So I think within that lens itself, when we talk about governance in the context of Malaysia, we tend to look at only the mechanism, but without looking at rights being principles that guide the framework itself. And I think that is where the gap actually really happens. But I cannot dismiss, of course, when you have the right societies, then perhaps it can lead to the better governance, but there is no straightforward line when it comes to this. Yeah.
And let's just jump a little bit about education and educating young people or students as, when they're in the universities. Malaysia does not have a structure or widespread tradition of human rights education in schools or universities, but I think they are slowly building up on this. What has the absence of formal rights education meant for Malaysia, and how has it shaped public understanding over the last 3 to 5 years? Yeah,
when you look at the education system in Malaysia, as earlier I mentioned, we have moral education, we have religious educations, we used to have civic education, but now the Ministry of Education was talking about the education that based on the values because of what had happened in the schools, the violence and things like that. So when you put everything together in the same bowl, but without the rights being the one framework that ties up everything, this is where the gaps happens. Because in moral education, not everybody receive moral education. Some receive religious education, some receive the moral education. So that can actually, in a way, widen the gap of understanding what rights really be. Not to say that we do not teach human rights at all in the school, but now our system is that we integrate into the different subjects inside the school. But of course, that open up to the debate whether is it effective, or should we just teach a human rights education as a sole subject. And I think Suhakam, they have had actually continuously teach human rights in the school, but I guess perhaps something that is more institutionalized can be considered.
But we're going to talk about this more after this break, so we'll be right back after these short messages. Stay tuned. Welcome back. I'm with Dr. KHOO Ying Hui, and we talk about human rights. And continuing with our conversation earlier, other countries introduce rights education early in school through their civic education, ethic courses, or community engagement across disciplinary learning. Now, looking internationally, what kinds of human rights education that models exist that perhaps Malaysia as a country can adopt and introduce in the curriculum?
Yeah, well, there are certainly several models, because at least if we look at Southeast Asia alone, in fact, among the universities network, ASEAN University Network, we also have a thematic network called Human Rights Education, whereby we look at a model such as in Thailand, Philippines, and Indonesia perhaps, that actually talk about human rights education more and more institutionalized into the education system compared to the other countries. And I guess Malaysia itself will have to think about which model that actually is suitable for them. Either it can be integrated into the system itself or stand-alone subject. But nevertheless, I think what's really important is to ensure the rights framework is being integrated into the whole education system. Because among the university right now, we are also talking about human rights-based principles when it comes to the university's value, because of the missing of this rights framework. So I think in some countries, they have the human rights subjects alone. But I think one of the most crucial first step is that the human rights should be taught to all the students despite of the disciplines that they are in. Means even if you're a science student, you should learn about human rights as well, because human rights doesn't belong to law or social science alone.
True.
But in medical practice, you also need to know about right as well. So yeah,
I think that's a really good subject, because human rights topic encapsulates everything, right? And I think it's not supposed to be like just a humanities subject, right? And I think that we need to revamp and look towards the including everything in every education.
Because if we look at business itself, in the context of Malaysia, we have an action plan on business and human rights. So right now, the global is talking about, you know, if you're in the business, you need to know human rights as well. So it's cross-discipline already. So
it's like talking about ESG. You know, every business, you know, everybody wants to include that as well. Now, talking about universities like which you are lecturing, have pockets of research and expertise which you are definitely, that is your right down your alley. But no national framework, I presume, ties them together. What role can universities like or other private universities can start to play in building human rights literacy, and what first steps are both practical to really achieve this, Doctor?
Well, earlier I mentioned about the initiative of the ASEAN University Network on the human rights education, the initiative to actually come up with a framework on human rights-based universities. The intention of that particular framework is to actually try and guide the universities across, at least in the Southeast Asian context, to actually use the rights framework when it comes to every steps of the implementations, the practices. So it is not just about teaching human rights alone, but it is also about the rights-based framework that the university should have when we talk about human rights. Because when we talk about research, yes, in the University Malaya, apart from the research group on human rights that we have in the Faculty of Arts and Social Science, many of us coming from the different disciplines and different faculties are also exploring or writings about human rights from different dimensions. For instance, if we look at AI, AI and human rights is a very huge topic and very important topics. For example, like right to privacy. And now in Malaysia, we're talking about freedom of information, and people are talking about right to information. So everything is actually surround this rights discourse, but the missing gap is that we are not using the framework very clearly.
Now, just wondering, especially as a lecturer, what digital information and or disinformation are shaping the younger generation today, and their views on human rights? What are the unique challenges and perhaps opportunities using digital platforms for rights literacy?
Well, I would say today we are living in a very challenging and complex world,
For sure.
With the technological advance and of course with the misinformation, disinformations, and people didn't know how to actually trace out the fake news itself. So I think this is a time where the rights literacies is gonna be extremely challenging. And when we talk about rights literacy, and I think we do not actually talk about only to the young people, but actually when we look at surrounding us, the elderly as well, because they are also exposed to the technology in a daily basis, and that opens up to the cyber crimes and things like that that people fell into, including the scams and things like that. So all those are surrounded with the technological era that we are currently at. And I think the rights literacies should not come with just the governments establish the legislations, but at the same time, this is where I say the human rights education is really important to actually educate people how to use technology ethically and knowing how to actually protect yourself as well. So if we look at Australia about the social media, the bannings on the 16 years old, I would say I have my reservation because it is not a world that you can stop the young people from using technology itself. But I would think that more urgent is about educating them to use it ethically.
course. Now, in reality, it's not easy to implement human rights, and everyone can't understand or grasp the whole concept. But some research shows the rights strengthen stability and, of course, a long-term progress for an individual or a country as well. How do we start shaping the narratives around human rights and see it as part of a development of a nation and rather not a barrier?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't want to say that, if a country keeps championing and talking about human rights means everything is good in the society, because human rights can also become a political tool as well. So I guess it is always about the combinations of how do you educate people to know how to fight for their rights, how their rights are being protected, and when their rights are being violated, they know how to actually channel their grievances to the right platform and mechanism as well. So the rights base is something that, at the UN level, they have been always talking about the rights base for a longest time. But nevertheless, as we know, rights base can be very subjective as well. This is where the business and human rights documents become very crucial and very important in terms of basically penetrating into the spectrum where rights basically exist and also important in all spheres of the industries.
Now, I'd like to talk about the risk that is, remaining rights illiterate as the world becomes more complex. What opportunities would rights literacy open up for Malaysians if they should choose to speak up and be more vocal in whatever situation they are in?
Yeah, of course. Right now, you see, we have not only the Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, but there are also ministries of education and so forth that are working on, human rights program, as well as I think we cannot dismiss the important role of the civil societies and the NGOs as well. And this is where the UN Research Group and Human Rights see the gap where when we talk about human rights advocacy, human rights education, human rights discourse, it is not just about looking at the NGOs and looking at the state, but the university have a very strong roles in terms of human rights education as well. So those are the things that I think is very important, that we have a multi-stakeholder mechanisms when we talk about the human rights mechanisms in the country.
Yeah, earlier you told me that you were working or once worked with SUHAKAM as well. So I just want to talk about if SUHAKAM is mandated to promote and protect human rights, but they often, of course, face a lot of political and institutional challenges. In your view, what institutional reforms, shifts in political are most critical to empower organizations like SUHAKAM, who champions for human rights, or similar bodies to effectively bridge the gap between policy and, of course, public understanding?
Well, if we look at the histories of establishment of SUHAKAM until today, its performance is always being affected by the leadership. And that, of course, is related to the politics as well. But of course, the least that we want to see is politics being intertwined into the work of SUHAKAM. And as you rightly say, that the SUHAKAM has a role when it comes to promote and protect human rights. So the promotion part of it has arguably always been the priorities. And it's always about the protect of human rights that is missing, and until today. This is where the civil societies continue to advocate the government to actually strengthen the SUHAKAM mandate in terms of protecting human rights by giving them a bit more powers in terms of investigation, in terms of inquiry, which they have done a few, but they should have more powers when it comes to investigations.
Right, and now to truly embed the rights-aware culture in Malaysia, Malaysia perhaps requires not just education, as we know is very important, but legislative commitment as well. So looking ahead, what one piece of new or reform legislation do you think would have the most immediate and profound impact on strengthening political accountability and also public trust?
Well, I guess for the very start, if we look at legislations, we have to do away with all the legislations that continue to be anti-human rights. For instance, this detention without trial. The detention without trial clause in the legislation is anti-human rights from the United Nations standards. So we still have certain laws that that actually allow all this from happenings. And also the second thing is about, of course, the death penalty, which Malaysia has shown some progress. And that is, of course, related to the right to life as well. So there are several legislations that continue to be debated. And of course, the Counter-Terrorism Act. So it is also very interesting for us to, when we look at Counter-Terrorism Act and intertwined with the human rights, whether Counter-Terrorism Act actually impact on the human rights, and how does it impact on the human rights, or does it actually cause human rights violations as well, and how the governments generally use the counter-terrorism legislations. So this is another interesting dimension for us to look at.
Now, building a rights-aware society is one of the things that we talked about earlier. If Malaysia begins to lay the foundation now, what kind of society would we have in the next 5 to 10 years, Dr. KHOO?
Yeah, well, I will certainly, of course, wish Malaysia should start much earlier.
Correct.
But of course, if we look at the 10 and 20 years later, I think education is always powerful. And but of course the mechanisms, the proper mechanisms should be put in place. And I think whether we call it civic educations, values educations, or any types of educations, I still believe strongly that human rights educations should be put in place, and we should not let the human rights education being politicized, because earlier on you were discussing about the right and left spectrums of the politics, and I would say that currently the challenge is really the human rights notions is also being challenged by the different communities have a different way of understanding human rights, and this is precisely the challenge of Malaysia to actually ensure that the rights framework is something that what we have subscribed at the United Nations, and rather not distort it with only our Malaysian context, because while country context is important, but country context sometimes can be not compatible with the human rights standards that we should have.
Now, finally, to wrap things up, today is Human Rights Day 2025, and the theme is our everyday essentials. What does this mean to you, Dr. KHOO?
Yeah, well, what I see and how I see about this slogan is basically, I think we live, every day, there is a right that's surrounding us. When we talk, let's say when people are asking the questions and we want to speak, and then people, if they do not allow you to speak, you also say, oh, it is my rights to speak. Actually, those are already happening around us. And this is something that I think the UN slogan is to show that the rights is always around us, and it's not an alien language.
Well, on that note, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, Dr. KHOO. And understanding human rights isn't just, of course, an academic exercise. It's a responsibility that comes with living in an evolving society. And as we work toward a more informed and compassionate nation, every effort to strengthen public understanding brings us closer to real change. I'm Liz Ong, and also Dr. KHOO, and this has been The Nation. Thank you for watching, and follow us for more in-depth conversations on the issues that matter. Bye for now.